In 1969, at Beth Abraham Hospital in New York, there was a patient named Leonard. Leonard had not left the hospital for 30 years and was part of a group of patients who had been there since before some of the nurses were even born. They all suffered from a mysterious disease that had spread across the country in the early 20th century. This disease put them in a state of near coma, frozen inside their bodies like human statues. No one knew what was happening inside them. Were they conscious? Unconscious? Somewhere in between? Or worse? Were they fully awake and aware of everything around them, but unable to make their bodies communicate with their minds? No one knew. Then, one day in March 1999, Leonard and the others went through their daily routine, nurses bringing food, cleaning, and medications. When the doctor came in, he started giving them a medication by mouth for each of them to take. There was nothing strange about this. They were always experimenting with changes in medications, and doctors were always trying different things to help their condition. Even the nurses didn't ask about this medicine. It was normal for them. After Leonard took his medicine, he was moved to the room where the patients sat together, watching TV, listening to the radio, and other activities. After staring at the television for half an hour, Leonard suddenly woke up and began to speak. Where had Leonard been all that time? What was the sleep disease that kept him in that state? And what was this medicine he took? The most important question, could this happen in the future? I hope you are well, and here's another medical mystery for you. The 20th century witnessed enormous changes in humanity worldwide, such as the introduction of indoor plumbing in homes, then electricity and gas lines, the appearance of the radio, then the invention of cars, followed by aviation. World War I brought terrible destruction and killed about 20 million people, followed by the Spanish flu that claimed another 50 million lives. To put this in perspective, the world's population at that time was around 1.6 billion people, meaning about 5% of the world's population disappeared between World War I and the Spanish flu. If you knew more than 20 people at the time, you certainly knew someone who died from one of these two events. But as things calmed down and the world began to recover, preparing for the Great Depression and World War II, one of the strangest epidemics occurred, still unexplained to this day. It all began in the winter of 1916 in Europe, when patients started arriving at hospitals complaining of extreme fatigue, complete lack of energy, and a very strong desire to sleep. Some experienced neurological symptoms like tremors, convulsions, and involuntary movements. In severe cases, patients were in a near coma state, unable to move or interact with those around them. Fortunately, many recovered quickly and resumed normal life, although some continued to suffer persistent neurological problems, which we will discuss later. But these were few. The unlucky ones remained in this state, and new cases appeared daily. The disease caught the attention of a neurologist at the psychiatric clinic at the University of Vienna, who examined a group of patients with the disease. The first doctor to write a scientific paper about it was Dr. Konstantin von Economo, who published a paper in a journal called Wiener Klinische Wochenschrift in 1917, which means Medical Weekly in Vienna. In this paper, he named the disease encephalitis lethargica, often abbreviated as EL, also known as sleeping sickness. He categorized the disease into several types because the patients showed somewhat different symptoms, and since he was the first to publish about it, the disease became associated with his name. But von Economo was not the only one writing about the disease. A French doctor named René Cruchet also treated patients in a military psychiatric hospital and wrote a description shortly after von Economo's publication. Overall, about 9,000 research papers were published about EL by the mid-1920s. In 1918, British epidemiologist F.J. Cruikshank published a paper adding similar cases that had appeared earlier, mentioning diseases like Krieverkehr Krankheit in Germany between 1672 and 1675, Ravenna in Sweden between 1754 and 1757, and sweating sickness in 1857 England in 1485. The new disease reached North America when the first case appeared in New York City on September 4th, 1918, with 3 more cases recorded within a month. The disease spread rapidly in the United States in the second half of 1918, and by the following spring, it was reported in 20 states. The disease reached its peak worldwide in 1923, killing about 2,000 people in the US alone, with millions infected worldwide. It resembled a real zombie outbreak to a large extent. Hundreds of thousands lost the ability to walk, talk, or live a normal life. The disease spread terrifyingly, with no clear cure. Then around 1925, suddenly the issue stopped. New cases appeared sporadically, but not in large numbers as before. Those infected eventually overcame it and resumed their lives. The story was almost forgotten, but some questions remained. First, what caused this disease? Second, why did it suddenly disappear? Third, a small number of people, unfortunately, did not improve and remained in a near comatose state for decades. Over the years, doctors studied surviving patients to try to discover the origins and workings of the disease, but there is still great mystery around it. Some patterns appeared as Dr. von Economo classified EL into 3 types: amyostatic acute hyperkinetic somnolence of Salmo-Belgian. The least common type is amyostatic acute, where patients experience prolonged body stiffness, but remain aware of their surroundings with very slow movement. As Dr. Von wrote, if you looked at these patients, you'd see cold faces devoid of emotions, making you think they were in severe dementia, but mentally they were intact. The hyperkinetic type initially appears with mania-like symptoms, with involuntary spasms in the face, hips and shoulders, and some sounds they make. This is the first stage, followed by fatigue, discomfort, and weakness, which can last days. During this period, some experience hallucinations and nerve pain in the face and limbs. The most common type is somnolence of Salmo-Belgian, with symptoms including confusion, delirium, and a coma-like state. Other signs include cranial nerve paralysis, which is related to the brain, and a very strong desire for sleep. An interesting link was discovered between EL and Parkinson's disease symptoms, and I emphasize that I mean Parkinsonian symptoms, not Parkinson's disease itself, which many patients developed. After the epidemic subsided, Parkinson's disease became a broad term for any neurological condition causing stiffness, tremors, and slow movements. Many EL patients took medications, but later developed Parkinsonian symptoms, becoming mentally and physically fatigued, with stiff limbs, bent posture, and unsteady gait. The difference between these Parkinsonian symptoms and normal Parkinson's disease is that the former appeared at any age, even very young ages, while regular Parkinson's typically occurs after age 50 and progresses steadily with age. For this reason, these symptoms were called Parkinsonism because they closely resemble Parkinson's disease. Parkinsonism symptoms that appeared after EL begin about 6 months to a year after acute EL diagnosis. Some studies indicate that the number of patients with Parkinsonism decreased threefold during that period. Due to the many Parkinsonism cases appearing in the 1920s and 1930s, many doctors believed EL caused Parkinsonism. Some doctors thought Parkinsonism would disappear entirely once the EL generation died, but this did not happen. Many patients died over the years due to EL complications or Parkinson's, but some continued living trapped inside bodies that no longer functioned normally year after year, with no hope for a near cure. Now we come to the 1960s, where our story begins. A small group of survivors lived in a chronic care centre at Beth Abraham Hospital in New York. These patients had contracted the disease in their 20s and were now in their 60s. About 40 years had passed. In 1966, a new doctor began working with these patients, a neurologist named Oliver Sacks, who had recently completed his neurology training at an American university. He was interested in exploring the strange neurological cases he had read about. Upon arriving at the hospital, he described the place as a museum or wax museum. In his later book about the patients, he said they were conscious and aware, but not fully awake. They sat motionless and silent all day on chairs, with no energy, drive, desire, emotions, or even appetite. They sensed everything around them without active interest, in complete apathy. They had no feeling of life, nor did they feel life existed. They were like faint ghosts or zombies with no desire for anything. Dr. Sacks described these patients as standing in strange positions, with everything around them frozen. A distinctive feature, so much so that if you raised one of their arms and left it, it would remain raised and not fall unless you put it back down. They were truly like human statues. In early 1967, a new treatment became available for Parkinson's disease called levodopa or L-dopa. This treatment works by increasing the body's ability to produce dopamine, a hormone that allows the brain to transmit nerve signals effectively. Dopamine deficiency is a primary cause of Parkinson's disease, where the body loses the ability to produce new dopamine, affecting signal transmission in the motor cortex. L-dopa is a precursor to dopamine, a substance the body needs to make dopamine. When Parkinson's patients take L-dopa, it helps them produce dopamine, stopping the progression of Parkinson's symptoms. Dr. Sacks described it as a kind of fertilizer that stimulates dopamine growth, a dopamine fertilizer, so to speak, since there was a reliable link between EL and Parkinsonism symptoms. Dr. Sacks wondered if this treatment could help EL patients as well. It took him 2 years to acquire L-dopa and get permission to try it on these patients. Finally, in March 1969, he obtained the drug and started giving them doses. The patients awakened and began acting normally. Those who had been in near coma or deep sleep for 40 years suddenly came back to life, aware and conscious. able to move, walk, and throw a ball to each other. It was truly a real miracle. Of course, many of these patients were very excited to return to normal life, but some couldn't cope well. Some became violent or returned to their sleeping state. As Dr. Oliver Sacks said in a 1985 interview with the program Fresh Air, the patients would wake and interact, but had an emptiness in their minds because they found themselves in another world that no longer made sense to them. They had no place in this new world, no family, no friends, nothing. Imagine these people having been in that state for 40 years, many of whom looked in the mirror and were surprised by the elderly person staring back. Certainly, music and fashion were strange and confusing to them. After a few months of being awake, living life, and feeling alive again, the effect of L-Dopa diminished, each dose giving fewer results than the last. Eventually, they stopped responding entirely to the medication and returned to their near comatose state again. If this story seems familiar, it is because Oliver Sacks wrote a book about it titled Awakenings, which was turned into an Oscar-winning film starring Robert De Niro and Robin Williams. Next year will mark the 100th anniversary of the end of the EL epidemic. Until now, there is no clear explanation for the cause of the disease. Some theories try to explain its emergence and are divided into two main types: toxicity theories and infection theories. There are also modern theories attempting to explain the appearance and disappearance of the disease. But discussing them would make this video too complicated, long, and boring for viewers. So we will limit ourselves to the first two theories. The first theory, the toxicity theory, says the disease may be caused by an external poison of a certain kind. For example, in England, there was a period when it was believed that the cause could be food poisoning or the solanine substance that accumulates in potato sprouts. Dr. Von dismissed these toxicity causes, such as food poisoning, from the start because none of the patients had any digestive problems. He also ruled out diseases like typhoid, polio, syphilis, and toxic gases. However, he noticed that all patients had flu-like symptoms, and since they had just come out of the Great Spanish Flu pandemic of the 1920s, he thought that the EL epidemic was caused by that influenza pandemic, which is the second theory, the infection theory. There had been previous cases of encephalitis associated with the influenza pandemic, but studies showed that the brains of people who died from influenza were neurologically very different from those who died from EL. Nevertheless, Dr. Von still believed the influenza virus was the cause of EL. All these theories, old and new, that attempt to explain the emergence of this strange epidemic have not provided any useful or conclusive answers. Until now, this epidemic or disease remains a strange medical mystery of 100 years, and no one knows how it appeared, how it disappeared, or why no one could find a definitive cure for it. But if it reappears in the future in a more advanced and dangerous form, how will humanity deal with it? To this day, no one has solved the mystery of this strange disease.